all warm-ups. No Deal Brexit essentially is on the agenda today. So all we're going to do is, I've got a panel of specialists here who are going to talk about the possibility of the No Deal Brexit, some ruminations on Boris Johnson's premiership so far, again uneventful, not much to see there, and then thinking about October the 31st, what actually, or rather November the 1st, what actually is going to lay in store and what could be coming out from that in terms of for the businesses, for us as citizens, and those sorts of things. Quick introductions to our panel. So I have with me Stephen McCabe, who is the Labour MP for Birmingham Selly. He'll also be the Shadow Education Minister, previously with Ed Miliband's government. I also have Arantza Arana, who is a lecturer here at Birmingham City University, who's in the Centre for Brexit Studies and is a specialist on security and borders and EU relations, particularly with Latin America and the Mediterranean areas. I have also Bennion, who fills an MEP for the Liberal Democrats for the West Midlands and also has a background in agriculture and farming. And also Henrietta Brealey. Henrietta is Director of Policy and Strategic Relationships for the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce. So I will kick off without further ado. Possibility of a no deal Brexit. You may have seen that a few things have gone on this week in relation to this. Whether that's changed anything, I guess history will be the judge of that. But first of all, so if I start with you, Steve. So in terms of the possibility of the new no deal Brexit, what's been going on in Westminster, what are the implications there?
Well, I mean, I think what's become abundantly clear in the last few days, if it wasn't apparent to people previously, is that the Prime Minister does not have an exit plan. It would appear there's very little going on in terms of negotiations. He's a prominent and visible advisor now has kind of made that rather clear in his comments to the Telegraph. I think what's happened is that I think that once the reality of trying to negotiate Brexit began to dawn on the people who put all their energy into campaigning for it, but without giving any great thought to the mechanics of it, I think once that began to dawn on them, it's been quite a slow process. I think David Davis was the first person to kind of discover it wasn't going to be a walk in the park or the easiest negotiation in history. They have moved to what's the new fallback position, which is to pretend that no deal was always an option. No deal was never an option. Nobody ever campaigned for that. Everyone who campaigned to leave campaigned for this new set of trade arrangements they were going to negotiate with ease. Now, no deal has become the fallback position, and the con is to pretend to people it was always there. And it's just one of these new mantras. There is actually no such thing as no deal. What it really means is if we leave without successfully negotiating and concluding a set of sensible arrangements, Britain is going to be plunged into social and economic turmoil. And there is no telling from anyone what the consequences will be. We can make some judgments about what people in the medical profession say they fear, what people in the business world say they fear, what has been revealed by the Yellow Hammer documents, which now have to be trashed because they were commissioned by the government but didn't say what people wanted. And we can judge from the government's own evidence to the Brexit Select Committee, which point out that the two regions that stand to suffer most will be the North East and the West Midlands if there is a no-deal Brexit. So, I mean, I think the situation is really serious, and the worst possible thing you can do in a situation like that, having created it, is to then run away and demand an election as your way out. And the necessity at the moment is to try and resolve the situation we find ourselves in. I'm quite happy, personally, to have a general election. I don't think you can go on for very long with a government with no majority, and this seems to be a government who wants to have a kind of negative majority now. But there you go. I mean, I'm quite happy to do that, but I actually personally think it's a dereliction of duty to create such a threatening state of affairs and then run away and pretend you can have a shadow election that's about something else. And I don't think, you can have as many photo opportunities as you like. It doesn't address the fundamental issues. The simple choice, in my judgment, is we either have to go back and negotiate something which will look rather like a Norway Plus model. I think that's about the only rational way to leave the European Union. Or we have to bite the bullet and say to people, actually, this is nothing like what you thought you were being promised in 2016. It's not remotely like. It's a bit like saying you were getting a top of the range, flat screen, all singing, all dancing colour TV, and you find out you've got a little black and white box with squiggly lines. It's nothing like what you were anticipating. And in those circumstances, maybe we should give people the choice, this is my view, of saying, this is it, absolutely this is it, that you want it or not. I think that's where we are.
So, so we've got what's happening in Westminster, but imagining this is just a one-sided process is slightly erroneous. So, Arantza, from in terms of the likely possibilities of it from the EU side.
Very briefly, obviously we have the bill being negotiated at the House of Lords and then it's coming back to the House of Commons. There is still a chance that it will get royal consent before the close of Parliament, so it is a possibility that the bill will go through it and we will avoid a no deal. However, at the same time, you could have, I'm just talking about potential scenarios, you could also have elections before the 31st of October, and whoever wins the elections could have a repeal bill on that bill. So that's plan B. But you asked on the EU side, to have an extension you have to request it and it has to be approved by the European Union. In theory, obviously they will have the summit in Brussels, I believe it's on the 17th of October. And at that point, they can agree to an extension, which the rumor is that it will be until January. But if that takes place, then in theory, the UK should have a commissioner for the European Commission. And obviously, the European Parliament will sit as they have to sit and will go ahead with different bills and discussions, etc. And the UK, obviously we have MEPs. The MEPs will have to obviously discuss new bills and ideas. So having an extension is slightly more difficult than in May. So there is a chance that maybe the European Union could say this time perhaps it's not the right thing to do. Personally, I think that there will be an extension, but the extension will not come. It will not be just given in a natural way. There will be discussions about what are the next steps and what could possibly the UK do to provide some sort of guarantee that this will be the last extension, because it's having a large impact on EU countries, EU citizens and business and other sectors.
That's an interesting point. It's having a large impact on the other EU countries. Now, there's been work done by people such as some academics over at the University of Birmingham that talked about actually the limited level of exposure within other EU countries comparative to the UK and possibly Ireland as well. But I think a couple of months ago there was a great headline in the Dutch newspaper which read and is translated directly as Brexit Online, where we actually had a number of businesses starting to relocate and take their investment out of the UK and then put it into Holland, to Netherlands. So Phil, with regard to this is something you've been working on.
It is. Yes. I just backtrack just 1 second, because I think what you suggested that if we have the election too early, there's time to repeal this bill. That's absolutely right. And if any of us have looked at the Strathclyde crashing of the voting intentions figures, the Conservatives could actually get an overall majority if there's no tactical voting with just 33% of the vote. With the splits as we have now, with Lib Dems on 18, Labour 27, the Greens on 5 or 6, and the Brexit Party on 11, and as it stands. So they could actually be in a position, if we have this election before the 31st of October, to repeal the bill that's just been passed. We also don't know whether the request for an extension will go to the commission, to the council, in the terms that it will accept, or it might be that if Boris, even if they don't have an overall majority, and Boris is still the Prime Minister because they're the largest party and they're given the time to actually form the government, even if they're, as they are now, 30 or 40 seats short, but they have more seats than Labour, then we still could be in a situation where he can fail to deliver the conditions that the council will request for granting the extension, and so he could use a sort of form of constructive dismissal to get us out with no deal. So I think it's extremely dangerous going for an election before the 31st, before the 31st of October, and before we actually have the extension in the back. But yes, you're absolutely right. This was my focus of actually working on the EU side of it. Even during my election campaign, when people were saying, "Well, what's the point of electing you? You're only there for 4 months." My first point was, well, Macron was the reason why we got a short delay, a short extension. Very much the one person who stopped the extension being long enough was Macron. Macron's party is part of my group in the European Parliament. I am going to work on the En Marche MEPs and turn them round on this. And this is exactly what I've done. When I first got there, the view of the French group and the French are the biggest group in Renew Europe. Renew Europe, the Liberal group, we now have 108 MEPs from only about 60, 70 odd before. The French have 21 of those, and the UK has 17. So we're the two largest delegations within the Renew group. And back in the beginning of July, when we started, the French position was, you need to leave just to let us move on. They didn't really want us to leave, but they just wanted the situation resolved. And the two most prominent members of that group are Nathalie Loiseau, who was a minister in Macron's government and decided to make the switch to the European Parliament. She was formerly a prominent member of Sarkozy's party as well, so she has been in governments for a long time, and she's Macron's trusted sort of leader in the European Parliament. And I have spent a lot of time talking to Nathalie Loiseau, and the result has been she's been on French television several times calling for Britain to be given, the United Kingdom, to be given the option to have another referendum and stay in the European Union. And David Guetta, but David Guetta's brother, Bernard Guetta, who writes for the Le Monde, he was probably even more sceptical, and this week he's written in the newspapers, and he's on the Foreign Affairs Committee with me. He's a new MEP too. Again, that Britain should review its position and stay in the European Union and lead the European Union along with the French, of course. So we've got a complete about turn from the En Marche group. Now they're not the only difficult ones. So we've also got Ciudadanos, which is the now about the second biggest or third biggest party in Spain, but the Popular Party, the Socialists and Ciudadanos are very, very evenly matched now. So they're the kingmakers in Spain, and they're more gung-ho on Gibraltar than the old Popular Party are. I mean, these were people who were talking about taking in the gunboats to take Gibraltar back and dreamed that they were actually going to be welcomed as liberators. And so we've been working also, and I've got to know quite a lot of the Ciudadanos people, and particularly their group leader, Luis Garicano, who I've known through Liberal International for several years, so we were already good friends. And Luis has been tweeting and tweeting and tweeting about Britain staying in the European Union, and that is one of the really big parties in Spain. And the guy who sits next to me is from Mallorca, and he's using his social media he's doing all the Stop Brexit stuff, all the stuff we've been doing, putting out, and he's been sharing it because he's got such a big British electorate in Mallorca, and he used to be the regional president. So we've been really turning these things round with our sister parties in the Parliament. We've also been working across party lines. We had a big event this week where the Greens, the Labour Party people, and ourselves, and the Scottish Nationalists all got together and signed a joint declaration. There is the sort of competition between us has sort of fizzled out for the time being. So we're working together. What we need now is more working together, I think, particularly between the Lib Dems and Labour and this end, because I think, going back to my first point about the Strathclyde data, the one thing we don't want to be doing is in a situation where a Labour Remainer can either hold or win a seat where the main competitor is a Tory Brexiter, and we're in the frame and we take 15% of the vote and deliver the seat to the Conservatives in any oncoming election. That is obviously stupid, but likewise, where only we can win the seat or hold the seat, and we get enough Labour votes to deliver again that seat to a Tory Brexiter on 35% of the vote, that again is equally stupid, but it looks like that's where we're heading. So I think that just that's a challenge to the Labour Party and I've already spoken to Tom Watson and Jess Phillips about this. So that's a challenge to the Labour Party to at least. I'm not talking about a wholesale electoral pact, but I think it's something
slightly beyond the remainder
yes,
of the question. So let's
We'll have to go back to that.
But that was my final comment in this.
So we'll get back on track here in terms of, so the possibility of a no deal Brexit generally looks like it might be rescinding. However, there is the potential there that depending on if there is a general election, and if that general election, the party campaigns on the basis of not having a no deal Brexit and repealing the law that says we're not going to have a no deal Brexit, it could still happen. So there is still a huge amount of uncertainty.
Yes.
So let's think about, in terms of the West Midlands, businesses within the West Midlands, the economic situation, what impact, it's not only the impact of what the no deal Brexit is having, but actually what impact is it having on decisions that's being taken by businesses currently?
Significant impact. I'm going to come back to that quickly, but on the no deal Brexit issue, the thing to remember is the extension is only until the end of January. At the end of January, we could be very well in exactly the same position. If the deal is passed, it's only the deal on the UK's terms of withdrawing from the EU under that declaration on the future relationship. If there's a deal once the transition period is passed, we could be back in the same situation. So it gives you an idea of the massive amount of uncertainty that is currently affecting businesses at the moment, and quite frankly, they're all pretty pissed off. So if you look back at March, we did see a significant number of businesses stockpiling, preparing for Brexit, in all the ways that they were advised, then nothing happened. I listened to Radio 4 this morning, and there was a business on saying that they stockpiled, they put a lot of time into preparing for Brexit in the run-up to the last deadline. This time they're not going to bother because they're not confident that it's going to happen. And that is a really worrying situation. If even businesses that were relatively well prepared are now almost winding back from that state of preparedness. So where we are is we're still advising businesses that legally, nothing's changed. Politically, things are moving very fast. But legally, nothing has changed. We are still due to leave the EU with or without a deal at 11 p.m. on the 31st of October. And all businesses should be looking at understanding where they may be exposed to risk in relation to Brexit, and how they can take steps to reduce their exposure to those risks. In fact, if everyone here could do me a favour and take out your phones for me for just a second. If you'd like to, you're very welcome. If you just Google West Midlands Brexit Health Check. West Midlands Brexit Health Check. This is a tool that we created at the end of last year, and we've now rolled out across the West Midlands Combined Authority area with support from the Combined Authority and our neighbouring chambers of commerce. And it's a totally free online tool for businesses. They can tick a few boxes, tell us about their operations, and it pulls up an automatically generated personalised report which says, based on what you've told us, these are the areas of your business that we think are exposed to Brexit-related change. Here's some steps we recommend you take to prepare. Unfortunately, it can't tell them exactly what Brexit's going to look like because we do not know, but it can flag up those areas that businesses should understand, key things they should understand about what a no deal Brexit WTO rules would mean, so that if it did happen, they'd be forewarned and therefore prepared. And it is a really useful tool for us as well in terms of gathering intelligence on what businesses, that is the word indeed, yeah, what businesses are and aren't doing in relation to Brexit. So we do ask that we report back monthly, I should say, to the Combined Authority what businesses are telling us. Yeah, it's all of them, in fact, all of the top 4 results. It's on about 4 different websites. So we report back monthly to the Combined Authority on what businesses are telling us. And we're currently seeing that on a scale of 1 to 5, businesses on average rate themselves between a 2.2 and a 2.7 on the extent to which they've researched and prepared for Brexit across 4 key areas. That's people and skills, trade, regulation and legal, business support and procurement. So that's less prepared than prepared if you think 3 is the midway point. And there are huge differences between the services sector and the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector is actually, according to this, and it is based on the sample that engaged with us, there's about 350 businesses who have taken part so far. But the manufacturing businesses that have taken part seem to have taken far more steps to prepare and have a higher understanding of what Brexit would mean for them. Probably because there's a lot more in the news about goods, in particular in relation to Brexit. Whereas services sector firms still on average select around 6 different areas of their operations that could be impacted by Brexit, but are much further behind in terms of their understanding of Brexit and also the steps they've taken to prepare. Concerningly, across the board, only just over half of businesses think that their board and senior management team have fully discussed the risks of Brexit. About a little bit lower percentage think that they've done a thorough Brexit risk assessment, and you're down into sort of the thirds of businesses, the businesses that have actually taken concrete actions, such as changing their import and export strategies, changing their investment strategies, investing in training, and all of that sort of thing. So it is a bit of an issue for the business community. Some businesses really getting behind this, put a lot of time and effort in. A lot of businesses, partly because of resource, going, actually, there's so much else going on. Can I really take people off their day jobs to focus on Brexit planning if nothing might happen for another 6 months, a year, 2 years? So it is a very tricky situation for businesses to manage. But as I say, we continue to advise, look at the risks to your business arising from Brexit. How can you reduce your exposure to those risks? On what impact it's having already, we deliver something called the Quarterly Business Report, which is a, as the name suggests, quarterly survey of businesses across the Greater Birmingham area. And we've been doing it since about the 1980s, so we've got a brilliant long track record that we can map against official ONS data to check that we're seeing business sentiment matching official data, which I'm pleased to say it does. What's been worrying from that is in our last survey, our measure for investment intentions fell to its lowest level that we've seen since the last recession. So it fell actually into just negative territory. We use something called a balance score index, which I can talk you through if you'd like to know a bit of methodology. But for now, all you need to know is anything below 50 is indicative of negative sentiment or contraction. And last quarter, for the first time since I think it's Q2 2009, it fell to below 50. So this is a real indicator that businesses aren't feeling confident putting money up front, investing in their business. They're holding on, holding back, waiting to see what's going to happen, which, as we know, has snowball impacts on economic growth and GDP. So there are worrying issues out there at the moment. We're just surveying for Q3 at the moment, and we're looking to see what those results tell us about overall business confidence and other measures. Cash flow also came up as an increasing issue in our last quarter's results as well. An increase in businesses saying their cash flow positioned over the last 3 months. And we have anecdotally been hearing from companies who are saying, look, they've seen payment terms change, they've seen later payments, or customers using Brexit as a good opportunity to negotiate payment terms more favourable to them than perhaps their supplier, the business in question. So there are issues emerging for businesses on a number of different fronts. Would you like me also to comment on what a no deal Brexit would look like for businesses? Is now a good time? Should we wait till later the discussion?
We've got another question at the end to talk about after the 31st, so shall we leave that bit?
I have spoken enough. We'll
Okay,
go back to that.
brilliant, thank you. Right, okay,
So
so
we did just come in and quickly on farming.
yes, that would be useful.
Yeah. Well, obviously, my particular knowledge of business is the farming industry, and curiously, still with farmers, we're still in the 50-50 situation we were in 2016. Roughly 50% of farmers voted for Brexit, despite the fact that I think they knew really that it was not going to be good for their businesses. And we still have roughly 50% of farmers at the moment still supporting the idea of Brexit. Now, I've done a little video that somebody picked me up outside of on the college green and was doing these videos, and I did a 1 minute farming and Brexit video, and I basically call it a triple whammy because firstly, the agriculture bill, the draft agriculture bill that Joe put together, but it's now been moved. As far as the support payments were concerned, not even a consultation, they will be phased out by 2027. Now, the rest of the Europeans will continue to get support payments, the Americans get support payments, the Japanese get huge support payments, all of the developed world except one or two like New Zealand and get support payments of some form, and even the Canadians get free transport and that sort of thing. So without support, whenever a competitor gets support, and that support at the moment is something like 60% of farm income. I think we're pretty well dead in the water. The second one is exports. The export market is absolutely vital too, because we specialise. We are the sheep producer of Europe. We produce far more than any other EU country. We're one of the world's big sheep producers. 90% of our exports go to the EU, and roughly 40% of our production is exported. So the sheep farmers in Wales, England, Scotland, and the whole, basically they lose half of their market overnight. And then there's the tariffs, because if the tariffs are imposed, which they would have to be imposed, they're in the regions of 40-50%, so it makes them completely non-competitive. Then the third piece comes into after the October the 31st, but I'll deal with it now. Is basically if we're in this no deal situation and the economy starts to contract, any government will be put on the spot in terms of getting food prices down, and we know that the Conservatives have already been talking about unilateral zero tariffs on imports. That won't give us zero tariffs on our exports, but under WTO rules, nobody would have to reciprocate. But if we have zero tariffs on our imports, and also we don't maintain the sort of standards that we used to, for instance, the Malaysians have offered us a trade deal on the basis that we accept all their non-certified palm oil. The EU will only accept their certified palm oil at the moment, and I've been to Malaysia and seen the logging and how much rainforest is being felled for palm oil plantations. They can't sell this stuff at the moment, so they want a trade deal on the basis that we'll take their palm oil from recently felled rainforest. And similarly with the Brazilians, they want to be able to up their beef exports to us, and we've seen the issue of the rainforest fires in Brazil. So this is the so we will be taking in unsustainable, low cost, zero tariff product, which will drive our farmers out of business. So basically we're doing a business, the situation in the UK is likely to be that beef and sheep farmers in this country and cereal farmers are put out of business simply so we can import it from low cost producers like Brazil. And that, according to Sean Rickard, who is formerly the former chief economist of the NFU, who is an independent consultant, probably the most knowledgeable person on this, said it's going to knock out pretty well all of British agriculture, except for a few niche markets.
Okay, excellent. Boris Johnson's premiership we move on to, chances of general election. I guess we could all talk for hours about this, but we'll probably keep it to a couple of minutes so we move on to the what the next door. Boris Johnson's premiership, Steve. Chances of a general election.
Well, I think the chances of a general election are obvious. It's coming, you know, and there's no question about that. The only question is about the timing of it for the reasons we've just heard. And as I indicated earlier, my own view is it would make more sense to try and get this thing onto an even keel and then go to a general election. Clearly the problem for Boris Johnson is he has no idea what constitutes an even keel, so he'd rather go for the election first and hope he can wrap himself in police flags and Union Jacks and goodness knows what, and run that sort of thing. But we're definitely going to have one. Look, I mean, I don't know how many Conservative supporters are here and would want to take a different view. My own view of Johnson is that he's a total charlatan. I remember him before he was the mayor. I sat on some committees with him at Westminster when he was still the MP for Henley, and I have to say I don't think anything has changed. Any of you, I'm not saying that Prime Minister's questions is the be-all and end-all, but any of you who saw it the other day would realise that there is a limit to how far you can go in politics with bluff and bluster, and it was ruthlessly exposed on Wednesday. This is a man, I mean, if you look at what he's doing to his friends, think what he's going to try and do to the rest of us. This is a totally narcissist in my view. He's utterly obsessed with himself. The only thing that matters is his interest. I think, quite frankly, I mean, if Churchill was the right man to be in charge of the country at a time of need, Boris Johnson is exactly the wrong person to be in charge of the country at this time of need. He has neither the personality nor the skill set to deal with the problems that we're facing. But he does have a ruthless machine behind him which is using taxpayers' money to create an illusion that may be capable of delivering an election result for him. And I won't go over all the things Phil said about the percentages and the way of Conservatives winning through the middle in certain seats, but clearly if the opinion polls are broadly right, that is what could happen. I'm afraid if that does happen, what we're likely to find is that our economy will very rapidly descend into, I would say, chaos, but it will certainly move towards recession. I think definitely into recession. So the 13.8 billion that the Chancellor was talking about the other day, that's fantasy money. It was always fantasy money because it's a one-year spending review, it's not checked by the OBR, it's not intended to deliver anything. Even if it did deliver, it would deliver it for 1 year, and the following year the money would be clawed back from all the services. It's a sheer pre-election fantasy, but it's a fantasy that I would say won't be delivered because that money won't be there. That money is based on Philip Hammond's headroom, and that headroom will disappear if our economy plunges. So, I mean, I think the issue about Johnson is he is trying to engineer an election solely for his personal interest, his personal vanity, to try and keep him in power. The best ambition this man has is to have a low-wage, race to the bottom, the things you mentioned about Malaysia, etc., style economy, because that is what they aspire to. They aspire to a kind of loose free trade network. And the minute we do opt for WTO rules, then of course we won't be able to negotiate any successful arrangements with the EU or any everyone else, because the rules that we apply will apply across the board. We will expose our economy to the most predatory attacks possible. That is where I would say a general election victory for Boris Johnson would lead. He knows that. He knows that that would be exposed over time. It's in his interest to try and get an election through quickly, blur the issues, confuse the issues, and get there. It is actually, and you know, I'm not interested in having a discussion here about electoral pacts and the complexity of all that issue. My own judgment is the electorate aren't stupid. They know how to form their own electoral pacts when they see what's going to happen, and they have demonstrated and seen something down the country at various times. They're capable of exercising that judgment. But what I would say is it's really important that people, wherever you are broadly on the Brexit spectrum, unless you're at the extreme, let's get out and damn the consequences, do or die, as they say. If you have any view about trying to protect the broader interests of our country, then people across the political parties have now got to work together. This is bigger than any individual group of politicians or any individual political party, and we have got to work together, because the alternative, I think, is economic and social chaos.
I think it's worth mentioning that, you know, despite this, and whenever we see him on television, you see the chance of stop the coup and the headlines are being hugely unpopular. He's still polling pretty well. You know, the Tories are polling the highest of all the parties. It's that, I know it's only, if you take the Brexit party out of the equation, now he is taking more of a hardline position.
Yeah. Well, I think the argument is that he's turned the Tory party into a version of the Brexit party, so I mean that is what he's appealing to. I mean, my guess is twofold. I think at the moment he continues to poll very well. As I say, if you've got the full range of taxpayers' money at your disposal to have that kind of promotion, then you know it's not surprising you get a bit of a boost out of it. I personally think he's a Marmite figure. I think people who are attracted to that kind of jingoism will be attracted to him. But I think people who fear where that may lead us will take a very different view. And the longer the reason why he wants to prorogue Parliament, and the reason why he wants to be prancing around the country and not in Parliament or in Number 10 dealing with the problems, is the longer he's in Parliament and exposed for the charlatan he is, the greater the risk to his own personal ratings. And I think we would see that. That's my own judgment.
Yeah, Arantza.
Well, I think that there is a bit of a Brexit fatigue when it comes to society.
Yes.
And I would be very careful with the polls, because in terms of linking them with popularity,
we saw the same thing with Theresa May, didn't we? Start polling about the same thing, and then
absolutely. And I think that at this moment, if you ask your friends, your colleagues, would you rather have someone who is going to just end with all of this, or would you rather go ahead and have elections, another referendum, another extension? Because of the amount of Brexit fatigue, many people just want to end it now, one way or another. It might be maybe an emotional response, a rational, pragmatic response, but it's been more than 3 years.
Yeah.
The amount of lies that we have seen from many different parts of the society in relation to what the European Union is and what the European Union does, and obviously about politicians, etc. It has had also an impact on the society, because it's very difficult for some of them know where to find the truth, broadly speaking.
I think this is really key, because even on my Facebook pages, the number of Remainers that I know that are not party political, that are now in the zone of let's just get it over with. And so, on the 1st of November, they can breathe a sigh of relief, and that's it all behind them, rather than all the trouble about to start. But there is a huge feeling, I think, amongst the middle ground, that they've just had enough of this, and they think that putting it behind them then they can get on with the rest of their lives. But they haven't assessed the economic chaos that Steve's been talking about as being a real factor. I think they still think that's unlikely.
But Arantza and Phil, excuse me, it doesn't end it, it just starts it all.
Yes, exactly, Janet. But I'm saying that I'm just saying what people are thinking, not what the real reality is. You're absolutely right.
It's up to us to tell us, to use that lovely soft word, remain, far more than Brexit.
And I think another issue with Johnson personally is that he rather thinks he's Mayor of Britain now, rather than Mayor of London. He's now Mayor of Britain, and his whole way of operating in politics has been of a mayoral style, and I think this is part of his thoughts about proroguing Parliament. It's an extremely it's a nuisance to
It's
it.
a damned awkward place
It's a
to
damn
ask you
awkward,
questions
yes.
and ask you
I
to
know.
account for yourself. Outrageous.
Just a bit of objectivity. What is the net extent of prorogation? How many days are we talking about? Compared to regular Parliament?
You're asking that on the basis that.
I'm asking.
I'm not disputing you. I'm just trying to answer you. I think I'm right in saying you're asking that on the basis that you are assuming that at this time of crisis we would have had a break for the party conference season. Most people, of course, assumed that at this time of crisis we would suspend
Yes.
that and that Parliament would sit. So the reality is we're having the longest prorogation period for, I think it's 300 years. It's quite significant. You can try to dress it up, as Jacob Rees-Mogg has said, by saying, oh well, of course we would have had this extensive break for the party conference season, and we're only then talking about an extra 5 days. You can make that case, you can make it, but most people that I know had assumed that we were going to suspend the party conference break because things are so important.
We had made very, very advanced plans to cut our party conference down to the weekend only, to Saturday and Sunday only, because we were expecting.
Summer recess a little bit.
Yes, it's normal. It's happened in the past. It's happened. It's happened in the party conference season in the past, where Parliament's been called back in during party conference season. And we were expecting this to happen. We were expecting to cancel the second half of our conference and just sit on Saturday and Sunday. And I think some of the Labour Party, I think, were thinking exactly the same was going to happen. So and also there's it's not just the Parliament itself. There's scrutiny within Parliament, within committees and things that can go on if required during what is normally just a recess.
Actually, the first casualty of the prorogation is the agricultural bill that you referred to earlier.
Well, that's probably a good thing.
Henrietta, I want to come to you. Sorry, come to you in terms. So, from in terms of the work Shane's been doing and your engagement with business, what's their perspective on Boris having?
Well, the Chamber is, of course, totally apolitical. We do not get involved in casting judgment on political parties or even individual politicians. But to be honest, we're not really particularly warm and fuzzy to the government at the moment because, as Steve's already alluded to, the West Midlands in the government's own analysis is shown to be one of the worst affected regions if there is a no deal Brexit. And on top of that, he's thrown HS2 into a lot of uncertainty, which underpins lots of local economic plans, economic growth, and also local transport plans. There's a lot going on in the region which would be ripped up starting again if this were not to go ahead as planned. I mean, just look out the window and you can see the cranes surrounding this particular area and you can see the impact it's having. So that's where we are. I think, like both Steve and Arantza have said, the fact that he's actually seems to be giving a decisive decision on Brexit is attractive to a lot of people. I speak to people who voted leave, who say they voted leave for a deal and do not support this. I speak to people who voted remain and say actually we're at the point now where the options are remain, deal, no deal. If it's no no deal, at least the decision's been made, we can adapt and respond. So it is, don't underestimate the attractiveness of that to people who are either tired of thinking about Brexit or haven't really thought about it that much, who would like to quite stop hearing about it on the radio.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the interesting thing there is this notion that people, I think this comes back to the Brexit fatigue issue, this notion that people are getting tired of and just in some way want to be wrong with things. Now, the Bank of England the other day published some projections of what would happen in the event of no deal, which actually downgraded the recessionary impact of it. So the implications are then that whilst it's not without its challenges, actually with the right form of preparation and a great understanding of the complexity it's going to create, it is something that's manageable.
I would say, okay, I think the biggest challenge for businesses, and it's not going to sound like the most exciting challenge, but the biggest challenge for businesses on a no deal Brexit is admin. So if there is a no deal Brexit, admin, administration, export documentation, customs declarations, paying your duties, tariffs, paying your VAT, all of that sort of stuff. To do that, businesses would either need to hire more people or pay more people to do it. And as it stands, there's not enough people in the system with the skills and knowledge to do it. Just on customs declarations, I think there's an HMRC estimate that would go from doing 50 million customs declarations a year as a country to 250 million overnight. Customs declarations is something you have to be trained to complete. Each customs declaration takes between half an hour to an hour to complete. So that's a lot of extra people. I've got a case study from a business who've been looking at it, which I will read very briefly the first part of. A small transport company based up in Coventry. Right now, the 300 consignments we ship to the Republic of Ireland each year are not considered exports, while we're part of the customs union. In the event of a no deal, every single one will need customs declarations. For us to provide these customs declarations ourselves, we need to employ at least another 10 people. They're not getting any extra money for completing these customs declarations. They can't afford to do it. So that's the real issue.
It's not just UK though, is it? Because Germany said they're hiring 1,000 extra customs officers because they import from the UK. So it's not just impact to businesses here and the ability to do business easily.
Yeah.
And I think 250 million is a bit low. I'd heard it was 350 million inbound.
Could well be.
So it's whichever way you do it, it's a massive number.
Yeah, and I think that the difference is that we import over 60% of what we import into the region from the EU, whereas obviously individual EU nations import less just from the UK, because the EU is obviously a much bigger bloc to be looking at than just UK. So the impacts, yes, definitely, the firms in Europe would have a negative impact as well in terms of having to do extra admin, but the UK would as well. There's also all sorts of issues with how businesses have been trading with the EU and understanding the fundamentals of international trade if their customers are currently EU, because it has literally just been like trading domestically. There's not been any of these additional barriers. So a lot of companies I know have been using something called X-Works in their contracts, which is a Incoterm, International Chamber of Commerce term, which is basically over to you on everything. We make the stuff, you deal with everything else. That term is going to be removed from Incoterms from November, and something that's totally unrelated to Brexit. Those companies that have been doing that don't necessarily, some do, some don't, but don't necessarily know or have the experience of how to manage international trade with a nation outside the EU. There was one company I was at the other week who literally produced the stuff, put it effectively on the side of the road, and then their customers come and pick it up, take it away, handle anything to do with duties, tariffs, etc. Whereas if there's no deal Brexit, some of their customers have said, actually we're going to have to hand some of that back to you because it's going to be an additional cost, an additional burden that we can't deal with. So they're having to look at it for the first time. So there are these, they're, like I say, not the most exciting things in the world. Most people don't, get all pent up about export documentation, no customs declarations. But for businesses, there are real fundamental nuts and bolts that will be changing significantly and need a lot of additional resource to implement. And that's one of the big issues around Brexit. Who's going to do it?
Is this specifically with those sorts of things around goods or around the service? So what are the implications for the service? Also service exports?
So this one's harder to pin down. But there are some implications around VAT on place of delivery, which I'll be honest, I do not fully know the detail. There are implications around data as well, which affects services firms, still affects the manufacturing firms, but services sector firms also on, obviously right now, part of the European Union, GDPR compliance. If we leave the EU, we probably will get an equivalency agreement with the EU because we are GDPR compliance, but if there is a no deal Brexit, we go straight to being a third nation. So firms would have to do, again, a bit of additional admin if they're transferring non-exempt data. So say for instance, you're a firm that has a subsidiary in Germany and your German subsidiary sends you personal data on all their staff, your HR team in the UK to process. If there's no deal Brexit and the UK hasn't already got an equivalency ruling with the EU, those firms would need to put extra safeguards in to ensure that those data transfers remain legal. Again, it's really techy, really faffy stuff, but it's the kind of thing that businesses are facing at the moment.
Sorry, I just want to pack, because then we can open up to questions now in about 10 minutes. Arantza, every time we talk about Brexit, it's always political constitutional crisis or economy crashing out.
Yes.
But actually there's a whole host of other things that are involved in it, that it changes our relationships with, that will have material effects on British people, British citizens. One of those is security, which is kind of your specialist area. What are the implications there?
Yes, that's a topic that it has not been discussed properly, in my opinion, and I don't think it is an accident. I think it's a topic that is very difficult to sell to the society. Clearly, if you leave the European Union and there is no deal, you cannot have the same level of cooperation in the area of justice and home affairs. The UK had the director of Europol, it was a British officer, former member of MI6, if I remember correctly. The UK has been involved in many Europol cases. The UK still benefits from information that you can find only in databases created by the European Union with the help of obviously EU state members. All that information, we can also talk about European arrest warrants, etc., the fight against terrorism, the fight against organized crime, etc. As a member of a society, live alone as someone who researches on this topic, I want to live in a country that is going to do its best to create cooperation in the area of security. Anything against that doesn't make any sense to me. However, we don't discuss those things. If there is no deal on the 31st of October, my understanding is that obviously states cooperating on Europol cases, they are preparing for that. However, you can prepare only for so long, because the moment the UK is not a party member of Europol, not only the way the UK benefits from the information that they get from the rest of the European Union, it works the other way around. Many EU countries will also lose key information from the UK. I'm talking about sharing intelligence and having common threats and cooperation at policy level. In terms of mainly security and defense, there is the discourse on creating the EU army. That is not going to happen anytime soon. Even the name EU army is completely an exaggeration. It's only about having a sort of a structure. Level of cooperation that is not an EU army at all. However, the UK, together with France, traditionally have been the main countries involved in the development of security and defense in the European Union. Therefore, if you are losing the UK, that affects negatively the European Union. But there are other countries also willing to step in and take the place of the UK in the area of defense and security, and obviously cooperation with the police. We shouldn't forget that after 3 years, many EU countries take for granted that the UK will leave. One way or another, that they will leave. So they're trying to realign, and they're trying to see who is going to take the place of the UK at the economic level, but also when it comes to power balance and division of power within the European Union. And if the UK decides to stay, then it's going to be difficult in some areas to be the member that used to be. Because in the area in relation to trust, if you have lost trust in some areas, it's going to be very difficult to take it back. You mentioned Gibraltar. Borders are extremely important, not just for goods or services, but also for security. We have clearly the issue of Northern Ireland. We should never forget that it's not a completely stable area right now, Northern Ireland. And we follow the news, what's going on there. We have seen events recently in Glasgow. We have the borders with Gibraltar, but that's more of a political than anything else. The moment Spain became a member of NATO, any potential issues there were resolved. From a security point of view, it's more of a political thing between the UK and Spain. And then you have the border in Cyprus, because you have obviously British military bases there.
Yep.
So from a security point of view, there is not much discussion public level. However, it is a very important item on the agenda. But how do you explain to a society that you're going to lose to some extent in that area by leaving the European Union? I think it's a very difficult discourse to say.
There's one other point related to that, which is my colleagues from the Baltic states are actually really quite frightened about Britain leaving because of their neighbour to the immediate east, because they don't think that he's necessarily just going to march in, but they think that he has a habit of opportunism, which we've seen in Crimea, and its support for the rebel areas, held areas of the Ukraine. And certainly my Lithuanian, Estonian colleagues and Latvian are worried that they recognise that the defence of Europe, particularly with the Americans clearly wanting to draw back their contribution, has become largely an Anglo-French project. And I think that if Britain withdraws, particularly with a very hard Brexit, where it makes the Anglo-French military and defence cooperation more difficult, that is exactly the sort of opportunity that Putin might take, simply to drive the tanks into one of the Baltic states, and which the EU then is supposed to respond to in some way, and he may well take the chance that there won't be a response, because the main driver behind the response would be Britain. And so the Baltic states are absolutely fearful of this situation.
Yes, a very quick follow-up. Obviously, the UK and France, one of the few countries that do spend 2% of the GDP as NATO requires.
Yes.
So losing one of their key members is
And they're also big, you see, they're also big countries that spend 2%.
Yes.
Steve, we're going to open up the floor to questions now, so I'll just finish up with the final question. So we've left with, after October 31st, assume we leave on October 31st, 1st of November. What are the implications for government, and particularly, we've now got these big commitments, austerity's over, lots of spending is being proposed by the government, but the actual financial position of government is worse now than it was 10 years ago. So what sort of implications does it have for government to be able to take any sort of remedial activity or intervention to compensate for any of those challenges that might arise?
Well, I mean, as I said at the outset, were we to enter into a serious negotiation about leaving, which would address some of the questions that business are posing, my own hunch is it would look something like a Norway Plus model. Was probably the only feasible, rational way of leaving the EU. It would kind of mean we'd end up being an associate member of the organisation we used to be a full member of. So we wouldn't have derived that many benefits, but we wouldn't actually be a member of the EU, and we would have created a stable platform that would address both the concerns around regulation in the single market and the tariff and customs questions. And it actually would open the door to addressing some of the security opportunities as well. Although it's pretty incredible to think that the main security intelligence database that we developed, we will no longer have access to. But that is how it's going to work, as I understand it. So I mean, I think it is possible to envisage a state of affairs where you could create much more stability and where you could have a reasonable transition where you do leave the EU. But my assumption is that is premised on a credible negotiation, which I think would eventually take you to, as I say, this kind of associate type of status. I think that is the only thing possible. The alternative to that, it seems to me, is that it's going to be enormously difficult to predict the economic consequences. I mean, I am deeply sceptical about any analysis that suggests in the short term there will be anything other than economic shocks. And the government are incapable of producing any analysis that shows that in the short term there will be anything other than economic shocks. I think in that scenario, as I said a few moments ago, it will be impossible to deliver the money that was promised the other day. I think that money won't be there, it will simply evaporate. Now, there is one way you can deal with an immediate economic crisis. You can actually choose to borrow to try and cushion your way out of it, and there's actually quite a good precedent for that, because that's exactly what the Labour government did in 2008 when we were confronted by a worldwide economic crisis. We chose to borrow so that people could keep their homes. We chose to borrow so that the banks wouldn't collapse. We chose to introduce scrappage schemes so that certain industries would continue to function and jobs wouldn't disappear. And of course, the price we paid for it was we were told that we had created the economic crisis and that you all had to live on nothing for the next 10 years in return. I would say that the only option open to the government if we face the kind of economic shocks that I predict in the short term would be to borrow massively to get us out of that crisis. But the consequence of that, particularly the longer that a government of this colour stay in power, is that the price will be you can look forward to an austerity period that may take us into the next 30 years, because that will be the consequence. There is no other way. You either suffer immediate short-term economic shock, which will have unpredictable consequences, but almost certainly will lead to job loss, business loss. I think the whole issue of the financial and services sector, on which we're quite heavily dependent, and which we're increasingly dependent in this part of the world, will begin to collapse. You can either stand by and let that happen. I predict the consequences of that would be almost unimaginable, or you can attempt to borrow your way out of it, but you'll be borrowing your way out of it with a currency that will be weakening by the day, and so the cost of borrowing your way out of it will result in massive consequences down the line, and it will initiate a very long, sustained period of austerity, probably much longer than the one that I would say we're still living in, by the way, because my view is this money that was promised the other day will never, ever materialise. This is a fantasy offer, and it won't happen. The money isn't there. The money will have to be borrowed. And I'm telling you that once we look at short-term economic shocks, we're not going to be looking to borrow money to build our police force or our health service. We're going to be borrowing money to sustain it.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think I even predicted that the 2008 borrowings would take 10 years of austerity to get back on an even keel, and this time we won't even be looking at what is simply, well, what is largely a demand deficit. It will be a long-term structural problem that we'll be borrowing against, which I think we agree with Steve, it could take 20 to 30 years of austerity to smooth out and get back to an even keel again. So I think that whatever happens, we are going to be, I mean, even some of my Brexit friends, their line is, we'll be poor but free. You know, this is their sort of almost the way they think now. So even my friends who are very, very pro-Brexit and you know, think that this is going to make us a lot poorer, and not just in the short term as well, in the longer term. There's also going to be issues when the government comes up against WTO rules, which it keeps parroting, but generally virtually every measure it suggests how it's going to cope with WTO rules is a direct contradiction of WTO rules.
Free to be poor.
Yeah, free to be poor.
Let's
Yes.
bring it to a close there and open up the floor to some
Yes.
questions.
Yes.
Whether you